Good morning, everybody. 6 a.m. here in New York City. It's 1 o'clock in the afternoon in Moscow, and we start with a Fox News alert. Russian President Vladimir Putin now threatening to use nuclear weapons, and Putin says, I'm not bluffing.
The saber rattling comes as President Biden is heading now to the United Nations. That happens later today to address the General Assembly about the war in Ukraine.
Putin's humiliated already. What will he do? We can't tell, but we have Kevin Cork here to bring us up to date on what's at stake. Kevin.
Morning, guys. It's actually pretty remarkable if you think about how far we have come. Think back to how this conflict has actually evolved in Ukraine. At the outset, you might remember there were some, including U.S. General Mark Milley, who suggested that Kyiv could fall to the Russians in as little as 72 hours. Now, months on, the Russians are calling up hundreds of thousands of reservists to use, as well, they're threatening, nuclear weapons if needed.
I think it is necessary to support the proposal of the Ministry of Defense and the General Staff to conduct a partial mobilization in Russia. I repeat, we are only talking about a partial mobilization.
Partial mobilization, but we're talking about 300,000 people. So more troops in the short term, but much more than that, as I mentioned, could be on the table in the future, as Vladimir Putin now says he will not rule out the possible use of nuclear weapons to defend Russia's acquisition of Ukrainian soil, which, to hear those on the ground tell it, could be a very big mistake.
And those who try to blackmail us with nuclear weapons should know that the prevailing winds can also blow in their direction.
Strong words there by the Russian leader. Meantime, back here at home, President Biden makes a visit to the Big Apple to deliver remarks before the 77th session of the UN General Assembly. He'll do so around 10:35. I've covered these before. They tend to slide. Of course, Eric, Sean, and others will be there. We also expect the president to have a bilat with the UN Secretary General and sometime after 1. Host a bilat with the brand new Prime Minister of the UK. Now, that visit to New York comes as Beijing considers its response to the president's repeated insistence that the U.S. might step in if China invades Taiwan.
Would U.S. forces defend the island?
Yes, if in fact there was an unprecedented attack.
To be clear, sir, U.S. forces, U.S. men and women, would defend Taiwan in the event of a Chinese invasion.
Yes.
You could tell that response surprised the reporter. Obviously, it surprised some people over at the White House as well. Now, the address is also expected to place China and Iran front and center. And despite his comments to the contrary, no, according to other sources at the White House, including Jake Sullivan, there's been no change in U.S. policy vis-a-vis Taiwan and China.
He was asked a question, a hypothetical question in this interview. When the President of the United States wants to announce a policy change, he will do so. He has not done so.
Of course, the big meeting is going to be happening with the President and the UN General Secretary. Again, I said it's a big meeting because it's more than just U.S. policy on the line there. They're going to be talking about the global response to some of the many issues that are happening around the world. And, of course, we'll have continuous coverage right here on Fox News Channel. But for now, back to you.
All right, Kevin, thank you very much.
And go ahead.
What I was going to say is Putin is ordering the mobilization of 300,000 because he does not want to lose the support of the Russian people. When, he could have ordered a full one and it would have been gigantic. But, right now, the public opinion, both state-run media and privately held polls, show that most Russians support the war, but the enthusiasm is more subdued than it was 8 years ago when he grabbed Crimea.
Well, Putin is saying that Western nations are encouraging the Ukrainians to hit this nuclear power plant that's controlled by Russia. It happens to be in Ukraine. They're saying, no, it's not us. It's actually Russia doing that. And then also Putin says he's accusing the officials in NATO countries of speaking about using weapons of mass destruction against Russia. But the NATO officials say they have not threatened Russia with nuclear weapons.
What's pretty astounding is some of their supporters that are allowed to be on the air or use forums like Telegram that have been supportive of the war and were there to really make sure the public was in support are beginning to question the tactics and the effort and whether the Russians can win or not. This has emerged over the weekend. And for the president, if he says everyone's drafted, that would just blow up in his face. But even saying 300,000, I'm going to need the reserves back in uniform, that shows a degree of panic. Remember, he hasn't declared a war. He calls it a special operation. Really? Well, by the way, what about the body bags coming back by the tens of thousands? And by the way, what about the fact that your men are dropping their uniforms and running away in civilian clothes and leaving weaponry behind? You think we're giving them a lot of weapons? The Russians are leaving behind. Now we're considering giving them tanks. I hate when we consider. You don't even have to announce it. We should just be doing it. The other thing to keep in mind, too, is they're going to make a major announcement on September 20th. They're going to have a fake vote and annex Luhansk, Donetsk, Kherson, and Zaporizhzhia. I'm sure I mispronounced that name. At that time, they will, of course, get the referendum. It'll be part of Russia, and they'll say, you know what, we got to defend it and try to rally the Russian people behind it. Here's the thing. They don't have the forces, they don't have the organization, they don't have the leadership, and they might not even have the weaponry to continue this fight. And remember, their greatest allies in this effort, and we have not pressured India, and that's a criminal in my mind. Modi humiliated them and said this is not the way you do things in this century. And he was rebuked by China and flat out said China has some penetrating questions about the war effort. Things are collapsing on that thug right before our eyes.
And this just shows you there are setbacks, and Putin is acknowledging that by saying, I need to now call in my reservists. These are the ones that don't expect to go to war unless the guys who were enlisted can't do the job. Then they send in the reservists.
They've been using prisoners. Right. And the prisoners are telling people when they're captured, I had one choice. I could come out and try to kill you, or I stay in prison, take my weapon.
So Putin this time says, I could use nukes, and I'm not bluffing.